Have you ever wondered how 20 of the world's largest economies collaborate to address global issues? Well, let's dive into the heart of the matter. In the late 90s, a financial crisis swept across Asia, revealing the vulnerability of global economies. This crisis ignited a spark, leading to the formation of the G20, or the Group of 20, in 1999. Comprising 19 countries and the European Union, the G20 was established with a clear purpose: to prevent future international financial crises. The G20 acts as a hub for dialogue and cooperation on the world's most pressing economic issues. It's like a global think tank, where the world's major economies gather to discuss and strategize. Together, these countries represent about 2/3 of the world's population, 85% of global gross domestic product, and over 75% of global trade. Over the years, the G20 has played a vital role in shaping global economic governance. It responded to the 2008 financial crisis by mobilizing resources for the International Monetary Fund, and it has consistently promoted financial regulations to protect against economic instability. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The G20 has also faced its fair share of criticism. Some argue that it lacks transparency, that it's too exclusive, leaving out smaller yet significant economies. Others question its effectiveness, pointing out that its decisions are not legally binding and that it has no enforcement mechanism. Yet, despite these criticisms, the G20 continues to be a significant player on the world stage. It provides a platform for the world's major economies to discuss and address global economic challenges. It helps create global economic policies, and it promotes international financial stability. So the G20, despite its criticisms, remains a significant player in shaping the global economic landscape. The conversations and decisions made in the G20 meetings ripple out, affecting economies and lives around the globe. As we move forward, the role of the G20 will continue to be pivotal in navigating the tides of our global economy. You may have heard of G7 and G20, but do you know the key differences between these two groups? Let's take a step back in time to understand the formation and purpose of the G7. Formed in the mid-70s, the Group of Seven, or G7 as it's commonly known, was established primarily to discuss and coordinate economic policies amongst the world's most industrialized economies. It was a response to the global economic crisis of the time, and the members include Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Now let's journey to the late 90s, to the birth of the G20. The G20, or Group of 20, came into existence to address broader issues of economic stability and growth, and to include emerging economies in the dialogue. Its membership extends beyond the G7 to include nations like Argentina, Australia, Brazil, China, India, Russia, South Africa, and others. Comparing and contrasting these two groups, one might say that the G20 is a more inclusive forum, with a wider geographical representation than the G7. It's also worth noting that the G20 economies account for about 85% of the gross world product and 2/3 of the world's population, which significantly amplifies its influence on global matters. Now let's delve into the strengths and weaknesses of each group. The G7, being smaller, allows for more intimate and focused discussions. However, its limited membership also means it might not fully represent the global economy's diversity. On the other hand, the G20's strength lies in its broader representation, fostering dialogue between developed and developing nations. But its larger size could lead to less focused discussions and slower decision-making processes. As we can see, both the G7 and the G20 have unique roles in global governance, each with its own strengths and limitations. The G7's strength lies in its focused discussions, while the G20's strength is its broader representation. Yet both groups face challenges, with the G7's limited representation and the G20's potentially less focused discussions. But it's through these diverse forums that our global economy finds balance and direction. Scene script. G21 might not be as popular as G20 or G7, but it's just as intriguing. Ever wondered why? Stepping into the enigma of G21, let's begin by understanding its formation and purpose. The G21, or Group of 21, is a bloc of 21 developing countries that emerged during the World Trade Organization's 5th Ministerial Conference in Cancun, Mexico, back in 2003. The group was formed as a response to the dominance of developed countries in international trade negotiations. Unlike the G20, which is a forum for governments and central bank governors, the G21 focuses primarily on trade-related issues. Now, let's compare and contrast the members, objectives, and influence of G20 and G21. The G20 consists of 19 countries and the European Union, representing the world's major economies. In contrast, the G21 is a coalition of developing countries, including powerhouses like China, India, and Brazil, among others. While the G20 aims to discuss policy issues pertaining to the promotion of international financial stability, the G21's primary objective is to address issues related to trade and development. The influence of both groups, however, is somewhat divergent. The G20, due to its economic heft, tends to have a broader and more direct impact on global economic policies. The G21, on the other hand, exerts its influence through unity and collective bargaining in international trade negotiations. Examining the strengths and weaknesses of each group, we find that the G20's strength lies in its economic power and the ability to drive global policy. Its weakness, however, could be perceived in its lack of representation for several developing economies. The G21, meanwhile, has strength in unity and the ability to voice the concerns of developing nations. But its weakness may lie in the lack of economic clout compared to groups like the G20. In essence, both groups have their own unique strengths and challenges. The G21, though lesser known, has its own unique and vital role to play in the international arena. Despite being overshadowed by the G20, it has the potential to significantly influence global trade policies, especially those affecting developing nations. As we navigate through the world of global governance, it's essential to understand the roles of these groups. In the intricate web of international relations, the G20, G7, and G21 have emerged as significant players. These groups, each with their unique set of members and objectives, are instrumental in shaping the global narrative, steering international policies, and impacting billions of lives worldwide. Let's take a few steps back and recap what we've learned. The G20, a group of 20 of the world's largest economies, plays a critical role in coordinating international economic policy. With its broad membership base, the G20 encompasses about 2/3 of the world's population and more than 3/4 of global GDP. It's a platform where leaders from diverse backgrounds come together to discuss and tackle some of the most pressing global issues. On the other hand, the G7, with its 7 member countries, has traditionally been a powerhouse of global economic policy. While it may have fewer members than the G20, its impact is no less significant. The G7 nations are the world's most industrialized and advanced economies, and together they represent a substantial portion of global net wealth. But what about the G21, you ask? Though it may be less known, the G21 is an alliance of developing nations in the World Trade Organization. It plays a crucial role in advocating for the interests of the developing world, pushing for more equitable global trade rules, and ensuring that their voices are heard in the corridors of global power. In sum, these groups are not just about numbers. They are about cooperation, negotiation, and the collective pursuit of global prosperity. They are about making sure that the world's biggest economies don't just talk to each other, but also listen to the voices of the smaller developing nations. They epitomize the spirit of multilateralism and the belief that we can achieve more by working together than we can alone. In a world that's increasingly interconnected, these groups, with their unique strengths and weaknesses, continue to shape our global narrative. So, what does the future hold for these groups, and how can they evolve to better serve the global community? As we gaze into the crystal ball, it's clear that the path ahead for the G20, G7, and G21 is fraught with challenges and ripe with opportunities. The G20, with its far-reaching influence and diverse membership, will continue to grapple with balancing the economic interests of developed and developing nations. It must strive to be not just a forum for dialogue, but a platform for action that can address pressing global issues such as climate change, income inequality, and the digital divide. G7, with its rich legacy, needs to redefine its role in a rapidly changing world. The group must leverage its collective economic might to champion causes that resonate globally, from championing democracy and human rights to spearheading scientific and technological innovation. The enigmatic G21, on the other hand, is in a unique position to bridge the gap between the developed and developing world. It can serve as a potent counterbalance, ensuring that the voices of emerging economies are not drowned in the cacophony of global discourse. However, to do so, it will need to overcome its own internal divisions and articulate a clear shared vision. The opportunities for these groups are immense. In a world more interconnected than ever, they can drive meaningful change by fostering cooperation, promoting dialogue, and championing sustainable, inclusive growth. But to seize these opportunities, they will need to evolve, to become more inclusive, more transparent, and more responsive to the needs of not just their member states, but the global community as a whole. I encourage you to delve deeper into the workings of these groups to understand their impact on global economics and politics. Because it's not just about the big picture, it's about how these macro trends impact our day-to-day lives. In the end, the journey of these groups is a journey of global collaboration and shared responsibility. It's a journey we all are a part of.